Welcome to Wife Cheating Story. I hope you have an enjoyable and relaxing time listening. Let's get started.
Everything felt like a lie the moment I stepped into that house. 12 years of marriage, a family built on promises, only to find out I was just a stepping stone. The sounds coming from my bedroom? They weren't dreams. They were my wife's real life with someone else. She used me, planned this life, this family, all to fund her twisted, secret love. And when I confronted her, she looked at me with no shame, no remorse, just pure indifference. But if she thought I'd walk away quietly, she was wrong. I crafted a plan, one she'd never forget. This isn't a story of heartbreak, it's a story of revenge. Can't I just enjoy my lunch in peace, Laura? I just want one more chance to convince you not to make a big mistake, Dave. If you keep going this way, Dave cut in. Do you really want to argue in front of everyone, Laura? Do all those people around us really need to hear about our problems? I don't care who hears us, Dave. We could have talked about this quietly many times at my lawyer's office in the last 6 months, but you refused each time after getting upset. And why shouldn't I be upset about what you did? We were married for 12 years. Then I find out that you never truly loved me. I was just someone to help raise our kids and to rely on for support. Let's face it, I was just the bank of Dave. Laura didn't respond to his harsh words. It was true, and she knew it wasn't something she felt proud about. In the silence that followed, both of them reflected on their feelings. Dave couldn't shake off the reality of how his once happy life had turned into a nightmare. He was sent home from work that day just before lunch. Seeing Karen's car in the driveway only made it worse. When he walked into the house, the noises from upstairs made him realize the truth. He was in shock. The quiet didn't last long. He expressed his anger, but Laura, looking sad yet unbothered, told him to wait downstairs along with a smug Karen. I still can't believe what you told me that day, Laura. That you loved Karen since college, and she was your one true love. But you wanted children and needed someone to support you both. You wanted to be at home with the kids, and, as you said, Karen needed extra income. I feel foolish not realizing that much of my hard-earned money was going to support your girlfriend. You never really loved me, did you? I was just a way to get what you wanted, wasn't I? No, don't just nod. Say it. Look me in the eye and say it. All right, Dave, I admit it. I loved only Karen. I was with you to have kids. You were the best choice. Best choice? So you were planning this? Who else was there? Dave asked, surprised. Well, there were Keith and Eric. Dave felt shocked by how calmly Laura spoke. Keith? Eric? So why didn't you choose one of them? They weren't serious. You were always honest and trusting, a straightforward guy, she explained. Karen thought your trusting nature would make it easy to keep our secrets. Well, she was right about that, Dave said bitterly. Just call me the perfect target for lies. Yes, you were, Laura admitted. Look, I'm not proud of what happened, but remember, it was a different time when we got married. Society still didn't accept relationships like mine and Karen's. Dave raised an eyebrow, looking doubtful. Okay, I'll be honest. It wasn't just about society. I wanted the stability you could give me, something Karen and I could never manage on our own. Laura looked down, feeling a wave of guilt. Dave's expression darkened. So, Karen was able to come to our home? Yes. And she visited often? Not as often as you think. I usually went to her place, Laura replied, her voice soft. The place I didn't know I was paying for? Yes, Dave. Feeling the weight of her choices, Laura's gaze dropped. Deep down, she always believed she was a decent person, someone whose actions were shaped by a society that didn't understand her and Karen's experiences. So, you never really loved me, Laura? Not even at the start? No, Dave, I'm sorry. I cared for you and respected you, but I could never love you the way you deserved. Dave's face grew serious as he took in the truth. Our whole life was a lie, a show, he said quietly, shaking his head in disbelief. If that's what respect looks like, I can't imagine what disrespect would be. Despite her frustration, Laura turned her eyes from Dave, but he pressed on. So, just like your so-called love, all your feelings were fake? Yes, Dave. And all those times you shut me out for weeks or months pretending there was something wrong? I'm sorry, Dave. It was because Karen was jealous. You really are something else, aren't you, Laura? This was the final blow for Laura. She felt guilty but also angry, and that anger surged back as they talked. "Just stop, Dave. The court starts again in less than 15 minutes, and I want you to understand me clearly before we go back." Dave raised his hands in defeat, his lunch forgotten. "What do you want, Laura?" "I want us to go back to normal, Dave. Normal like me moving back in and pretending nothing has changed? Acting like we have a normal marriage while our kids don't know? Where their dad gets a bit of pity now and then?" "Well, no, Dave. Now you know, we'll stop pretending. You can move into the spare room and Karen could move in." "No way, Laura. What do you think I am?" "Someone with no choice, Dave. Someone who needs to see things for what they are. What's that joke you always tell? Oh, that's right. If you have one thing in one hand and something else in the other, what do you have? Someone who does everything you say. That's you, Dave. You have no choice at all." Laura smiled, but it wasn't a kind smile. "Sorry, let me rephrase that. You actually have two choices. Live a regular life, well, sort of regular, living with your kids. I know I'm going to be off limits, but everything else will stay the same as before. Or you can go to the courthouse, make a scene, and see what happens next." Laura didn't wait for Dave to respond. "We got Judge Reynolds. Karen says he has been there for 20 years and always sides with the wife in any disagreement. He has never supported the husband no matter the situation. He'll give me the house and make sure you pay all the bills. He'll keep me on your insurance, and I will warn you now, Dave, there will be many challenges. I haven't worked, so he will give me a good amount of support. While you'll be barely getting by, I will be living comfortably." By this point, Laura's face was bright red with anger. Dave looked down at the table, feeling defeated. After checking her watch, Laura decided to share her best card. "What about your boys, Dave? Your dear sons? The court will only let you see them for one weekend a month. But guess what? They will be busy that weekend or have other plans. I will make sure to find reasons for them to be unavailable." Laura took a deep breath and went on. "And while you struggle, Dave, I'll be with Karen in what used to be your home, and you won't even have enough money for a simple outing. Be sensible, Dave. I have a strong lawyer and you are on your own. Why make this harder? We can almost go back to how things were. Not much will really change." Dave looked up, narrowing his eyes. "Nothing except living without pride. Not being able to look my sons in the eyes." He paused and shook his head. "Tell me, Laura, you mentioned that you have never worked. Even when the boys were old enough to go to school and I asked you to help with the bills, you didn't. Was this your plan all along, positioning yourself just in case I ever found out what you were hiding?" "Karen suggested it, yes. Besides, that was when we met during the day. Now I understand. So that's why she only had jobs at night, so she could spend all day with you while I worked hard supporting my family and covering her rent that she couldn't afford. Look on the bright side, Dave. If she moves in with us, it will help save you some money." Laura checked her watch again, but it was Dave who spoke next. "Why do you want to stay married, Laura?" "Because the boys need a father, Dave." Then, as an afterthought, she added, "And I don't want to see you struggle, Dave. You're a good man. You don't deserve the difficulties that will come your way if you don't work with me." "So this isn't about the boys not wanting to stay at home when that girlfriend is around? They're staying at Mom and Dad's. Did you really think I didn't notice, Laura? Or is it that friends are stepping back as your actions come to light? Isn't it true that the priest asked you to stay away on Sundays? Does any of this ring a bell, Laura?" Laura just shrugged and glanced at her watch again. "Time to go. What do you think, Dave?" I say take care of yourself, Laura. I'll see you later." Laura sighed sadly as she stood up and headed back to the courtroom. The divorce hearing wrapped up 47 minutes later and went pretty much how Laura expected. Judge Reynolds showed disappointment in husbands who wouldn't participate in therapy and praised mothers who stayed home, saying they deserved support against partners who were not helpful. Karen was very happy when the alimony was finalized, and it was more than Laura's lawyer had predicted. However, Laura felt a wave of sadness. Dave was truly a good person. His flaws didn't define him, and she thought about not cashing a few checks to help Dave stay connected with the kids and maybe mend some lost friendships. Looking across the room, she expected to see sadness on her ex-husband's face, but was instead surprised to see a look of pity. Suddenly, she heard a voice behind her. "Mrs. Laura Brown?" Laura turned to find two uniformed state police officers nearby. "Yes, officers." You are under arrest for fraud and breaking certain laws for obtaining benefits dishonestly. You have the right to remain silent. You have the right to a lawyer." His statement was interrupted by Karen, who hurried over from the audience. "What benefits has she received?" The second officer replied, "Alimony, child support, free housing, among other things. Are you Karen Smythe?" At that moment, Karen turned and ran toward the door. Epilogue. "Hi, Dave here. I feel like you know me, and I certainly know some of you." The memory of the courtroom usher, alerted by the noise from the police, catching Karen as she tried to escape through the door still makes me smile, especially when she bumped into the heavy oak wall. It reminded me that while being dishonest might not be a crime, making a profit from it is considered fraud. This includes various acts of deceit meant to gain an unfair advantage over others. When I found out about Laura's, well, it's hard to describe her actions, let's call it life plan, I felt understandably crushed. Overwhelmed by thoughts of my foolishness and the possible loss of my sons, I did what many might do. I turned to drinking. Then something unexpected happened. While I was sharing my story with my friend Jono, a couple nearby in the bar overheard us. Tom and Mike got together to support Tom after his recent divorce. This was due to a challenging situation they all faced with Judge Reynolds' decisions. Tom wanted to share his frustrations, and he found a good listener in me. I learned that Tom and Mike were state detectives. Together with Jono, Tom, and Mike, we made a plan. Laura and Karen had been involved in financial wrongdoing, relying heavily on my support. The details were a bit unclear, and the proof was not strong. That's why we needed a win in Tom's divorce case. If we could show that Laura had admitted her intentions and that Tom had recorded this at a nearby table in a restaurant, along with the judge's ruling, we could prove dishonesty. Laura's lawyer claimed that the recording shouldn't be allowed. However, the judge decided the recording was acceptable because Laura had said, "I don't care who hears us," during their talk. When Karen woke up, she was on a hospital bed. Laura helped her out, but Karen quickly ran away. We expected this, so Jono and I took turns watching her place. Tom waited for her 200 kilometers away at the state line. Karen was held until her trial, and Laura was very angry when she found out Karen had betrayed her. Karen was both a key witness and someone Laura had trusted. Laura cut ties with Karen, who was told by her lawyer to plead guilty. This decision hurt Laura's case significantly. The judges in both cases were shocked by their actions, and both women received 5-year sentences. Laura got an extra 6 months added when she confronted Karen during their first meeting in the yard. She could not attend the following family court where I gained full custody. By the time Laura got out, 4 long years had passed, and I had married Tom's wonderful sister, whom the boys affectionately call Mom. When I asked if they wanted to visit their birth mother in prison or talk to her after she got out, they just shrugged, showing little interest. Despite Laura's growing desire to see them, she often left feeling sad and alone. Though the entire experience was painful, it made me a wiser and much happier person. The end. Before you think this story is too far-fetched, remember there are 195 different countries in the world. Maybe things are different in the other 194. Plus, this is fiction where anything can happen. Now let's relax. You can thank Dickie for this story. The Magic Elevator. An Amish boy and his father visited a mall. They were amazed by everything they saw, especially 2 shiny, moving walls that opened and closed. The boy asked, "What is this, father?" The father, surprised by this new sight, replied, "Son, I have never seen anything like this before. I don't know what it is." As they watched closely, a woman in a wheelchair came up and pressed a button. The walls opened, and she rolled into a small room. Once she was inside, the walls closed, and the boy and his father noticed round lights above the walls turning on one by one. They kept watching until the last light turned on, then the lights began to turn off in the same order. After a while, the walls opened again, and a young woman stepped out. The father quietly said to his son, "Go get your mother." I had never been to a fancy restaurant like this before. It felt like a whole new experience. I usually liked small family diners better. I was lucky to get a table since the hotel where the restaurant was located mostly reserved tables for guests. Plus, it was a Monday night in winter, which helped my chances. The waiter seemed a little judgmental about my casual clothes, but that didn't dim my excitement. People might wonder why a tradesman like me was in such a nice place. I was there to meet my wife, though she didn't know that I would be there. I wasn't sure how much she would enjoy the evening. Sarah and I were both 45 and had been married long enough for our kids to move out, with our youngest leaving just earlier this year. I didn't marry someone out of my league, but our lives had changed. I continued to work in my trade, while Sarah started as a paralegal. I helped her go back to school to get a law degree, which she earned just before our first child was born. She stayed home until our youngest turned 10 and then took a full-time job as a junior lawyer at Peter Walker and Partners. Ever since, she had been both a devoted mother and a busy professional. Everything changed when our youngest left home. To my surprise, Sarah threw herself into her work while I wished we could spend more time together. She worked longer hours, often coming home late and working weekends. This led to many disagreements. I often felt like I lost those arguments. It seemed Sarah was determined to make partner before she turned 47, and my feelings did not seem to matter much. She would say sorry for bringing work home most nights, promising that it was just a phase and that she still loved me like before. Now, I may not be able to read minds, but I believed her. At first, I believed her when she would say, "I'll be done by 8, Dave, then we can relax or go to bed early." But after hearing that many times, I began to just hope that she would come to bed long after I had fallen asleep. I told her more than once that we were growing apart. Each time I said that, she would deny it, pay more attention for a few days, and then go back to her routine. To make my point clear, I started stopping at the pub on my way home 2 or 3 nights each week with some coworkers, even joining them for dinner. When I got home, I would hear a distracted, "Hi, honey," and see that she had already made herself a sandwich. Then she would go back to her work. Next, I started going out on weekends while she was working from home. After a couple of weeks without much response from her, I began leaving the house silently. She even voiced her frustration when I was out during dinner time and missed the meal she had prepared. That was the first time I suggested we think about counseling. This upset her, and she raised her voice, insisting that we were still very close. She felt she would have plenty of time to reconnect with me once she got the partnership and called me out for not supporting her career goals. It seemed she had forgotten that I had helped pay for her law degree. In addition to this, the next week was her company Christmas party. After years of me trying to avoid going and her begging me to attend, this time it was the opposite. I wanted to reconnect with her, but she suggested I stay home. This made me suspicious, so I insisted on going, and she agreed, but not happily. As usual, she arranged my best suit and adjusted my collar and tie, offering me a last chance to back out if I changed my mind. Not long into the party, I sensed that my wife was eager to improve her image, and being seen with me might not help her. Right after we arrived, she quickly got me a glass of white wine, which I swapped out for a beer since no one else was drinking beer. Trying to be supportive, I chatted with others at the party. I noticed that several new faces were there since the last time I attended. I could tell who mattered most by how quickly Sarah interrupted me whenever I started talking to them. I felt that she worried they might think less of her if I showed up as her husband. Did this bother me? Yes, especially since my job had supported her through law school. In the end, I asked her if it would be okay if I took a cab home, and unsurprisingly, she agreed without hesitation. Feeling increasingly overlooked at home, I began to emotionally distance myself from the marriage to protect myself. Aside from going out with friends, I joined a gym, a badminton club, a golf club, and a bushwalking club. Some nights, Sarah returned home before I did, and I assumed she was still working on weekends. I would not know. I was mostly absent. Then came 2 major changes in Sarah's behavior after a partner announced their retirement, and she was being considered for the position. First, she started asking me to stay home more. She said she missed me and expressed her love in words. After a few evenings of coming home early to be together, I noticed that nothing had changed. She was still working late or had important tasks to finish. I believed she cared for me, but her drive for success seemed to come first. Then I saw a shift in how she approached our relationship. She started making an effort to spend more time with me and showed her feelings more openly. When I asked her about these changes, she told me she wanted to make our bond stronger. She understood it needed some work and was eager to help it improve. Soon after, she told me she had to go to a week-long meeting in a city 3 hours away. She would leave on a Sunday morning to prepare in a hotel conference room, returning the following Friday night. This was the result of months of effort for her, and her bosses were letting her lead the presentation. If everything went well, it could mean a great opportunity for her. The night before she left, I felt like our marriage was getting better, and as a caring husband, I wanted to show my appreciation for the past week. I left my golf game after just a few holes, which I'd not been enjoying, and stopped at a store to find a lovely card. Thinking I might not have time to write it at home, I spent a little while in my car trying to find the right words. My plan was to slip the card into her suitcase before she closed it. Even with my delay and my effort to find the right words, I got home an hour earlier than usual. When I walked in, Sarah was unpacking some shopping bags. She looked surprised and said, "Dave, you're early," seeming a bit flustered. I noticed she was trying to hide one of the bags behind her back. As I moved to the other side of the kitchen to put away my lunch container, she quickly took something out of the bag and placed it on the counter. Then she said she needed to go to the bathroom and hurried upstairs. It all felt very strange. About 5 minutes later, she came back, set the reusable shopping bag by the door, and entered the kitchen. She tossed a crumpled piece of paper into the trash bin and smiled at me before saying she was going to make something special for dinner. Then she hurried back outside. I used that chance to take the paper from the bin, put it in my pocket, and told her I was going to shower and change. The paper had something that would change the path of our once happy marriage. On the bag was the name of a discount store. Inside was a receipt from that same store. What caught my attention was what was written on it. Trojan, regular, 24-pack. My wife had bought a pack of 24 condoms, and I had undergone a procedure years back that made that unnecessary. My eyes barely noticed the pharmacy item below the Trojans. Suddenly, I felt numb. I saw the card sticking out from the envelope meant for Sarah's suitcase and felt sick thinking about the kind words I had carefully written not long ago. Shaking my head to clear my thoughts, I looked at Sarah's suitcase on the bed. It was closed, but not zipped up. I took out everything inside, one by one: normal underwear, a warm jacket, business clothes, and 4 casual dresses, all suitable for a work trip. But there were no condoms in the zippered pocket or the makeup bag. Yet I found them in the inner pocket of the jacket, neatly tucked away. Also in that pocket was a small pack of morning-after pills. I carefully spread them out on the bed, took a quick photo, and then put them back where I found them. Feeling stunned, I packed everything back in the suitcase before jumping in the shower, my mind racing. What kind of week was my wife planning? Was she planning to meet a new man every night? No, Sarah was not untrustworthy. But why did she have so many morning-after pills? I knew condoms weren't always effective and accidents could happen. But surely if one condom failed, she would just need one pill. Or if by some chance she got pregnant, she could manage it quietly since she was open to such choices. But something else was going on here. As the steady flow of water poured over me, everything clicked into place, and I began to understand what was happening. It looked like she was planning to be with someone almost every night. It seemed she wasn't fully confident they would use protection, so she had a backup plan with the morning-after pills. This suggested that whoever she was going to be with had some influence over her. I knew she was going to travel with a few juniors on her team and Peter Walker, the senior partner. I briefly wondered if she might consider someone more senior in negotiations, but quickly dismissed that thought. Sarah was not untrustworthy. But what would happen if Peter Walker, the senior partner, made her an appealing offer? What if he suggested that if she nailed this deal and worked a bit harder, she could move up in her job? I wasn't so sure our marriage could handle that pressure. I knew the issue was not just a one-time slip. That would have been minor. What would Sarah do? I had a strong feeling about her choice based on what I found in the suitcase. If I had to guess, I would say she made her decision about a month ago. Our recent reconnection seemed like a way to keep me from questioning her actions and to lighten her own mind. Somehow, I was also gaining from her choice. Thinking about this, I stepped out of the shower and dried off. I took my things to the spare room. I texted Sarah saying, "I'm feeling really sick. I don't want to get you sick before your trip, so I'll stay in the spare room tonight." She replied, "I'm so sorry, but thank you." With the door closed, I thought about what to do next. I was sure she hadn't acted yet, but she was thinking about it. Once she did, it would be over for us. No, once she chose her career over our marriage, it would be over. The thought of her possibly being unfaithful was just the last straw. She hadn't crossed that line yet. I could go down and talk to her now, which might make her rethink her plans, but that wouldn't give me any answers. It wouldn't solve anything. I had to let her go and see if she would end our marriage. I did some research, booked a hotel, then unexpectedly I fell asleep. I stayed in my room until Sarah left for the hotel. Once I came out, I found a sweet note wishing me a quick recovery and promising me her support. I grabbed some sentimental items from the hall closet, things from our kids' childhoods that we had kept, then followed Sarah's route about an hour and a half later. I stopped halfway to buy some new shirts. Putting on one of the shirts in the hotel parking lot, I used the mirror to adjust one of the fake mustaches from the kids' dress-up box, and a baseball cap I hadn't worn in years. After checking in, I asked if Mrs. Sarah Brown had arrived, but there was no reservation under that name. However, after asking more questions, I found out Mr. Peter Walker had checked in. Isn't it frustrating when you're right? As I headed toward the elevators, one opened, and Sarah stepped out with Peter Walker. I looked down and quietly followed them at a distance to what turned out to be a meeting room on the ground floor. Sarah had her laptop bag, and Mr. Walker carried a box that I guessed held presentation materials. He unlocked the door, and they both went in. As I walked by, I noticed he left the key in the lock. I took it and went back to sit in a cozy chair in the lobby to wait. An hour and a half later, they came to the front desk and got another key before going back to the elevator. I let them get a 5-minute head start. Then I grabbed my bag and went to my room. While I was there, Sarah called me, asked how I was, and sounded disappointed when I said I was still sick. She hung up, saying she cared about me. It felt strange to see her walk past me in the lobby less than an hour earlier with her boss, heading toward the nicer of the 2 hotel restaurants. Her outfit was more eye-catching than the 4 I had seen in her suitcase. I sat there, hoping Sarah would change her mind about her plans. I worried she would put our marriage at risk. My fears grew stronger an hour and 37 minutes later when they came out again. Sarah was leaning into him and seemed to be walking a bit unsteady. She often drank too much. They got into a lift, and just before the doors closed, she leaned up to him. I captured a quick photo with my phone. It looked like either he had asked for something personal, or she was trying to convince herself that everything was fine. I walked to the hotel bar and raised a glass to acknowledge the reality of my marriage ending. I spent half the night thinking about happy times we had together. There were many memories to consider. The other half was used to plan my next steps. People often suggest thinking creatively about problems. I had spent time in that town for vacations before. I knew how most men would act in this situation and how I was expected to respond. However, I chose to do things my way. The next day, I spent 3 hours in the hotel business center, printing out some pictures and attaching them to magazines I had bought in the lobby. I also made a simple slideshow. Although I considered myself a regular worker, I was good with computers. I knew Sarah and her coworker were in a meeting with several others. Once they left for the day, I sneaked in using a key I had taken. To my surprise, Sarah's laptop was not password protected. I had reminded her many times to set one up. I checked her presentation and added my slideshow after the next slide. When I left, I locked the door and put some glue in the lock. Then I returned to my room, gathered my materials, dressed nicely, and refreshed my appearance before heading back to the lobby to wait. At 7:05 p.m., they entered the lobby again. Sarah wore a stylish cocktail dress with a string of pearls I had given her for our last anniversary. It hurt to see her using a gift meant for love to impress her boss. Still, she looked good, and her companion seemed to appreciate it. They walked into the fancy restaurant. This time I made sure to sit where I could see the waiter take them to their spot, a nice booth in a corner. I took my usual seat and waited a little while before I walked into the restaurant. I asked the waiter to lead me to a small table close to theirs. I chose a chair that faced them. Both of them looked my way, but didn't recognize me because of my disguise. They went back to chatting. I noticed Sarah was very focused on the man with her. She was holding his hand and seemed interested in everything he had to say. He looked proud, as if to say, "Look at me. I can still catch someone's eye." I couldn't wait to change that look. As I arranged my things on the table, the waiter brought my drink. At that moment, the man's phone buzzed with a text. making him let go of Sarah's hands for a moment. I quickly took off my disguise and waited. I straightened my posture so I looked more like myself. Sure enough, while her companion was distracted, Sarah scanned the room. I knew she must have been checking if she looked the best around. Our eyes met when she looked my way. It was funny to see her expression shift so quickly. Her face lost color and showed shock. I could see her wanting to tell her dinner partner about me, but she held back. She knew I was aware of her situation and any drama could hinder her plans. To add to her confusion, I smiled and waved lightly. I sensed her thoughts. Dave sees me differently now. Maybe I can explain myself. I looked down at the table in front of me and picked up a magazine, one I had changed. I held it up, making sure the altered cover was visible to Sarah. The cover had an ad for something related to a recent choice she made. It was clear now that pretending everything was okay wasn't possible. I kept a smile on my face. Sarah turned to her companion again, but hesitated. I could tell she thought about coming over, but that would only draw more attention, spiraling the situation further. It already was, but she didn't see it just yet. I could picture the excuses rushing through her mind. After putting down the first magazine, I picked up another one. This time, I had created a picture from scratch. I had never seen anything like it before. I doubted it ever existed until today. The story showed a situation that anyone who has read about complicated relationships would understand, including both Sarah and me. Her eyes darted to the title of my changed magazine. While I considered it a creative project, it seemed to make her feel even more uncomfortable. She realized that her excuses wouldn't work anymore. Panic set in. Understanding that she knew I was aware of her actions, I felt it was time to make her see I understood what was driving her behavior. That was what the third magazine was about, a clear connection to the truth. Looking at the glass ceiling while lying on your back was now facing its only surprised reader. Next was a copied sheet titled Divorce in 10 Easy Steps, which explained to Sarah the consequences of her actions clearly. In just 4 simple images, Sarah grasped that there was no point in denying her tough situation, that I understood why she was behaving this way, that we were heading towards separation, and that none of the usual excuses would change anything. When I glanced at her, I could see the reality of her troubled marriage hitting her, but she was strong and did not plan to give up easily. I watched her tap Peter's arm, trying to get his attention from his phone. That was when the final magazine appeared. How likely is a conviction when no evidence has been found? At that moment, I decided I had enjoyed myself enough, finished my drink, and started to gather my things. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed Sarah had finally caught Peter's attention. He looked just as uneasy as she did. I stood up, left a final card on the table, and walked away. The card simply said, "Mrs. Walker, we need to talk." As I headed toward the exit, I noticed Peter rushing after me in the reflection by the restaurant door. Sarah stayed at their table. As he quickly entered the lobby, I turned into the hallway leading to the meeting rooms. I turned the first corner and then paused, waiting. I was unsure of his abilities, so when he came around the corner fast, I threw my fist at his face. He fell to the ground, curled up and groaning, holding his face. I stepped over him and made my way to the elevators and my room. 10 minutes later, I saw an ambulance arrive, but no police car. 30 minutes later, I spotted Sarah checking out before dragging her suitcase to the hotel parking area. If I understood them well, their plan was clear. Sarah was expected to follow me home, ask me not to go public, or even pressure me to stay quiet. Meanwhile, he would stay behind to try to fix things. I went back to my room, opened the bottle of bourbon I had bought, turned off my phone, and tried to have a nice evening, given the situation. Epilogue. The next day, I went downstairs for lunch. The door to the meeting room was open, all personal items were gone, and the cleaning staff were busy tidying up. I hoped this meant my plan had worked. In her rush, Sarah had either left her laptop or couldn't get through the door because of the changed lock. He had taken over the presentation after getting into the room. Just 2 slides after starting the presentation again, the slides I had added began to show automatically. The first slide was a picture of Sarah and Peter sharing a light moment in the lift from 2 nights before, with the title, Sarah and Peter. The second slide showed a few items on a bedspread titled, "Sarah came prepared for a week with her boss." The third slide displayed a split image, my picture on the left and a picture of Peter's wife from her Facebook on the right, labeled Sarah's husband and Peter's wife. The last slide asked, "Do you really want to do business with people like this?" I had set the presentation to last just 8 seconds, hoping Peter wouldn't have enough time to stop it. If the empty room was a sign, the deal was off. Oh well, that was too bad, but never mind. I sent a copy of the presentation to Peter's wife from the hotel lobby before taking a couple of days to see the sights. Sarah didn't seem to put much effort into saving our marriage. I managed to agree on good terms by promising not to talk about her actions with our kids, family, or friends. Alimony seemed unlikely since she earned more than I did. While she didn't get fired, I heard a couple of years later that she still hadn't become a partner. She apologized sincerely, showing that she regretted how her choices affected our marriage. From the moment I learned of Sarah's plans, I decided that forgiveness was not an option. I could have confronted her, but what good would that have done? She had to choose between our marriage and her goals. If she chose her goals, given her past neglect in our relationship and her unwillingness to work on it, I could accept that. I started thinking about potential connections with others from my clubs or even new coworkers. I finished reading the note my lawyer had just given me and smiled, looking across the courtroom. There was Laura, my soon-to-be ex-wife, sitting with her attorney. She caught my eye and gave me a nervous but hopeful smile. Nervous because deep down she was not completely sure about the divorce I was seeking. I had taken care of her for over 25 years, giving her a comfortable life. She enjoyed being a full-time mother and didn't feel the need to go back to work, even after our youngest child went to college earlier this year. She thought we could fix our issues if she had a counselor who understood her point of view. Of course, this would let her keep living her usual life without any changes. She was very hopeful and had put all her trust in this idea. She felt sure because we had Judge Reynolds as our family court judge. Judge Reynolds is known for being very kind to wives during divorce cases. He rarely sided with husbands, no matter what happened. He often gave wives large settlements, leaving their ex-husbands in tough financial spots. For the past 15 years or so, many divorced men in our area really disliked Reynolds. You might wonder why no unhappy ex-husband had taken action against him before. Maybe it was because of his wealth, some of which he gave to local charities through his much younger wife, or perhaps he had support from powerful community groups. Personally, I thought the only reason he hadn't been removed long ago was due to some hidden agreements with someone high up in the legal world. Laura had every reason to feel confident and proud. At that moment, the court usher stood and announced, "All rise." I got up as Judge Jeffrey Reynolds entered the courtroom and took his seat, which creaked a little under him. He seemed a bit red-faced from the effort of getting to his chair. He looked at his notes and then nodded to the usher, who said, "This is a continuation of Brown versus Brown. The Honorable Judge Reynolds is presiding." The noise of rustling as everyone settled in filled the room. I barely got the chance to sit down before the judge motioned for me to stand again. He looked at me with a challenging gaze and said, "I see that 5 days ago you finished your latest stay in custody, Mr. Brown. This was your 4th 30-day term for not following court orders. As I have said before, I believe that counseling is very important when marriages fall apart. Marriage is significant, and we should try our best to maintain it. Are you willing to let your wife explain how she feels you may have let her down with the help of a professional counselor?" I struggled to hold back my feelings as I absorbed the judge's words. His manner could frustrate anyone. I took a deep breath and tried to keep my voice steady. If, after I share my thoughts, both my wife and her lawyer still want me to join counseling, I will agree. To my surprise, I was allowed to say everything I wanted, even though my lawyer had warned me that the judge often did things his own way. "Go ahead and speak, but keep it short. I'm busy," the judge told me. I cleared my throat and began. "In my 27 years of marriage, I faced many temptations. With money and success, people take notice, but I never gave in. I worked hard to build my business and support my family, taking on burdens that felt heavy. My wife, however, hasn't worked outside the home since our first child was born. I expected her to be just as committed to our promises." "Get to the point, Mr. Brown. We've heard this before," the judge interrupted. "I just want to say, Your Honor, that I did not deserve the shock I felt on March 20th. The judge rolled his eyes but stayed quiet. "I didn't deserve to come home early and find a stranger in my home or hear sounds from upstairs that made it clear what was happening. And when that man shouted from the living room, I was completely taken off guard." At this, Laura shifted in her seat, obviously uncomfortable with airing our problems. The judge spoke up. "My job is to protect the marriage and family values." Even though I was angry and wanted to express it, I held back. I remembered the last time my anger had led me to a bad place. I stayed quiet, trying to show my frustration through my expression. I was certain I didn't deserve the embarrassment of being told to wait downstairs until they were done, as if that was all I was. The only positive feeling I had in these tough times was remembering the look on that man's face when I didn't follow my wife's instruction to go back down. First, there was annoyance when I stepped in, then surprise when I moved him away. He got a few bumps before I threw his things at him. The man in the living room quickly left when I shot him a dirty look. So far, he wasn't known to the police, so he couldn't testify in my case. Once again, the judge interrupted, his patience running thin. "When is your court date?" "The end of next month, Your Honor." As I've said many times, Mr. Brown, what happens in a marriage does not really matter. What counts is the institution itself. You could have come home and found your wife with many people for all I care. I would still defend the sanctity of the marriage and her rights. There is never a reason for violence, even towards someone who was there for your wife during difficult times. I told you, a counselor will help us work this out. My goal is to support spouses who either go through counseling or understand how helpful it can be. The man smiled and leaned back in his chair, signaling for me to go on. I kept talking, brushing aside his remarks. I honestly didn't deserve the talk I had with my wife after her guests left. She said I'm a wonderful husband and loves me very much, but she feels that one man can't meet all her needs. She wants to keep having relationships outside of our marriage. She said I could either accept this or file for divorce, and if that happened, I would end up losing a lot. I smiled a little at the thought. Those words were recorded and were why her children were not speaking to her, and her list of friends was much smaller now. The judge looked frustrated. "Why do you keep boring us with your story, Mr. Brown? I have told you several times that your wife's actions don't matter in this situation. My job is to do everything I can to save your marriage and to support your wife's financial well-being. I believe this marriage can be fixed and your wife just wants you back with her. Let me remind you, if you don't take part in the counseling I ordered and don't act like a husband, your wife's outcome will be much better than what your lawyer is suggesting. You can count on that." So, I thought again, it seemed like women could do no wrong. It wasn't about money. It was that she had needs. I was going to change that. "As I said earlier, Your Honor, if my wife hears my proposal and still wants counseling, I will agree to that. But she should know this offer is only good for 1 hour. If we don't have her signature in that time, we will go to counseling, which won't help. Even with your well-known decisions, her final outcome will be less than this offer. I wish you wouldn't tarnish the institution of marriage by putting a price tag on it. But regardless, what is your offer?" My lawyer finally stood up to speak, sharing the agreement we had come up with. "My client will transfer the title of the Brown family home to Mrs. Brown, taking care of any taxes due on that transfer. He will give 90% of the value of all the bank accounts in his name, and in both Mr. David and Mrs. Laura Brown's names to an account of her choosing. He will also sign a document promising to gift 40% of all future profits from Brown Engineering or any other legal business he starts in Australia to Mrs. Laura Brown. In return, my client expects Mrs. Brown requested to drop the need for counseling, stop opposing the divorce, and change back to her maiden name as soon as possible." I noticed Laura and her lawyer having a lively discussion at their table. Then her lawyer stood up. "Your Honor, if Mr. Brown's offer is as generous as he claims, we are ready to sign the agreement within an hour." The judge looked disappointed, knowing once again that greed had taken precedence over principles, but he recognized a lost cause when he saw one. "Once I receive a signed copy of the proposal as stated, I will officially end the marriage of David and Laura Brown in 30 days. He banged his gavel, and we all stood up. His chair creaked as he stood and walked away. I glanced over at Laura's table and saw both her and her lawyer smiling broadly. She smiled because her life of comfort could continue. He smiled because he would earn a significant amount from the deal. I watched as he began reading the details of the agreement. I wished I could be there after Monday, when they would find out that Laura's house was heavily mortgaged, the bank accounts were nearly empty, and I no longer had any companies in Australia. 2 hours later, my lawyer called to say the judge had approved the deal and was busy with another case. I packed the last of my things, made sure I had my passport, and took a bottle of sparkling wine to my friend's house. To be fair, I hadn't met Lucy until Laura's actions showed what our marriage really was. For those who might judge me, I believed the marriage was over once the truth was revealed. So, I'm not perfect, sue me. Lucy is a couple of years younger than me at 47, and I have to admit she's not the brightest. But she has a big heart, the most beautiful blue eyes, and a presence that boosted my confidence. It took almost 4 weeks to build our relationship. It's hard to connect when you keep finding yourself in trouble. After spending time together, she told me I was giving her experiences she hadn't felt in a while. When I learned she was available, I asked if I could visit. She said she could, but had another appointment around 7. Knowing she enjoyed having a drink, I waited until we were in her room to reveal a bottle I had brought. She was in great spirits, laughing and enjoying herself. I briefly went to the kitchen to grab some glasses. Lucy was having a wonderful time, and I could feel her excitement. While she enjoyed her drink, I turned the bedside clock away, wanting to keep our time together peaceful. In a playful moment, I whispered something that made her giggle. Without hesitation, she playfully responded, showing her excitement. Our conversation felt easy, and it was clear she was feeling bold. Just when we thought we were finished, her husband walked into the room. "Hi, Judge Reynolds. Welcome home. I was just helping Lucy with some challenges." Epilogue. I wasn't in the country to deal with my legal trouble because I now live on a tropical island without an extradition treaty with my home country. My delay in the legal process allowed my divorce lawyer to finalize the arrangements I wanted. I had sold my business to a company based in Switzerland for much less than it was worth. A deep search of international records might find that my brother is the new owner, but I doubt my soon-to-be ex-wife has the resources to track that down. Most of my other assets were sold, and the money, along with most of our bank accounts, was moved to company accounts or placed into a trust for my children's education. They could attend the best universities, either here or abroad, with money to spare. Laura would receive half of what was left when their education was done, but since that was at least 5 years away, I wasn't too concerned. The downside of my new life was that I couldn't attend the hearing for Judge Reynolds, or rather, the former Judge Reynolds. After the shock of walking in on me with his wife wore off, he confronted me aggressively. Lucy, still a bit dazed, tried to step in. In the chaos, he accidentally bumped into her. I let him take one swing at me before I managed to hold him back. Thankfully, it looked quite impressive on the recording I had captured with my camera on the bedside table. He faced serious consequences for his actions, including losing his license to practice law and serving time for how he treated Lucy. His former position as a judge made it difficult for him to find support, and he was not placed in protective custody, leaving him among the general prison population. Luckily, he was unlikable enough that even the toughest inmates left him alone, although he still faced constant trouble. He didn't fully understand what was happening until one day when he was served an unusual meal. Whispers among the inmates surrounded the strange dish when it was placed in front of him, causing him to become ill, and he couldn't eat properly for the next 6 months. Naturally, the media jumped on the story of the judge's fall from grace, bringing Laura's name into the headlines. The attention didn't fade until she lost the house, unable to keep up with the payments. I became somewhat well-known, like a character in a story, which was both good and bad. As the morning sun shone through the window, I turned over and thought about the woman next to me and what the day might bring. She had recently gone through a divorce and had handled her split from her wealthy husband well. Don't think I was taking advantage of her. My brother's monthly support would keep me comfortable for a long time. The kids were set to visit me on my island again tomorrow, and they had grown quite fond of Lucy. They would be sad if I took advantage of her kind nature. They would surely bring updates about Laura. I already knew she had lost the house, moved from our area out of shame, and was now renting a small apartment while working as a waitress. During their first visit, the kids had tried to persuade me to forgive her, But showing them videos of our arguments changed their minds. They still answered the phone when she called, but our close relationship built on respect was gone. I sometimes wondered if she still had the energy to follow her dreams. But enough thinking about that. It was time to start Lucy's day. I got up, and she was smiling even before she opened her beautiful blue eyes. So much has happened in the past few months that it's hard to recall how my worries began. Let me think back to that unusual day. I remember it was a Wednesday, just like any other workday. I left for work at 7:30 after saying goodbye to my wife, Julie, and giving my 2 teenage sons, Pete and Mick, a gentle pat on the shoulder. They were at the age where they thought they were too grown up for hugs or kisses. Our routine was that Julie took the boys to school before heading to work around 9. She usually made it home by 4 to welcome them back. Sometimes she needed to work late and would call me, and I would leave early to be there for them. If not, I came back at 5, my usual time. It may sound boring, but we were just a regular family enjoying our lives. My Wednesday started normally, but it ended with me having serious doubts about my wife's honesty. I got home on time and greeted Julie as always. I called up to the boys, who were busy doing their homework. Julie always made sure they finished their tasks before any fun time with the computer or TV. I was careful not to interrupt them until they were done. "Honey, could you check my car? It hesitates when I press the gas. Maybe one of the spark plugs is faulty." I was taken aback by her request, not because she needed help with her car, nothing strange about that. One reason we still had 2 older cars was so I could take care of them myself. Julie worked as the chief accountant at a car dealership and got mechanical services at a good price, but I preferred to handle our cars on my own. The other reason we chose older vehicles was to save money. Julie wanted a larger home, but I didn't like taking on a lot of debt. By cutting back in other areas, we could pay off our mortgage more quickly and save for our kids' education. What surprised me was that Julie seemed to know more about cars now. In the past, she hadn't been very handy with vehicles. There were 2 times when she forgot that the car needed gas. If she had mentioned the car lagged a bit, I wouldn't have thought much of it. Knowing a little about cars, the first thing I would have checked would have been the spark plugs. I went into the garage and used my spare key to unlock her car. As usual, I forgot to move the seat before getting in. With Julie being 5'3" and me at 6'1", I usually had to adjust the seat to be comfortable. However, that day was different. The seat was neither all the way back nor all the way forward as it normally was. That detail raised some questions. It was a 4-door car, and adjusting the seat didn't seem necessary unless someone else had driven it recently. If I had been worried, I might have thought that the last driver was shorter than 6'1", but taller than 5'3". I might not have considered it if it weren't for Julie's new knowledge about cars. I started the car and let it warm up for a minute to be gentle on the engine. Then I remembered she had just driven it home an hour ago, so it should still be warm. I looked at the temperature gauge. The needle showed that the engine was cold. It hadn't been started for a few hours. I revved the engine and noticed the hesitation she mentioned. It didn't take long to open the garage door for some air, put on my thick rubber gloves, and remove the spark plug leads one by one. Sure enough, when I disconnected the lead from the number 3 cylinder, the sound of the engine didn't change. After a few minutes, I took out the faulty spark plug, cleaned the lead, and put in a new one. The engine sounded much better afterward, and the hesitation was gone. To be sure, I took it for a quick test drive and confirmed the issue was fixed. My regular job was not very challenging, so small wins like this brought me a lot of satisfaction. I had always been proud of my ability to solve problems. With that done, I thought about some tough questions to ask Julie. She wouldn't realize they were tough because I cared for her too much to accuse her of anything without solid evidence. I cleaned up before heading back to Julie in the kitchen. "All fixed, dear." "Great. Thanks for that, sweetie. How was your day? Did you manage to get away early?" It was a common question. I knew Julie wasn't happy with her job and sometimes found excuses to leave early, but the way she looked at me felt different this time. "No, I left at the usual time." I felt bad for lying, but pushed the feeling aside, keeping my face and voice calm. "You were right. It was a dead spark plug. I'm surprised you figured that out." This time, her response was quick as she turned back to the kitchen and started peeling potatoes. "I must have heard it somewhere." To someone who was paying attention, those hints stirred up doubts. The way she adjusted the car seat made me uneasy. I sensed something wasn't right. Just to clarify, I wasn't originally from Australia. I came from somewhere else, and when I first got here, I noticed some cultural differences. One thing that amused me was how men felt about being driven by women. It seemed uncomfortable for them. Usually, no matter whose car it was, the man took the wheel. While younger folks were shifting this viewpoint, the older generation still held on to it. If I were more doubtful, I might wonder if someone else had driven Julie's car earlier and knew a bit about mechanics. But I was feeling suspicious now. Thankfully, the kids ran into the kitchen at that moment, eager for their after-school snacks. I marveled, as I often did, at how much teenagers could eat at 5 and still be ready for dinner later. I concentrated on their lively chatter to shake off the heavy feeling I had. The evening went by with our usual routine, and we went to bed at the same time as always. I felt uneasy about what might happen if Julie wanted to be close. One plus of living in a big house was that the kids' rooms were far enough away so we wouldn't be interrupted. I remember lying in bed waiting for Julie to finish her routine in the bathroom. I struggled with my thoughts. Should I pretend to be asleep? No, that would be a bad idea. Julie knew I liked being gently woken in the mornings. I thought back on the last time we had shared a moment together. It had been quite a while. Our closeness had faded over the past several months, reducing from a few times a week to maybe once a week. She had stopped suggesting anything sweet or affectionate. This thought made me sit up straight. What felt unimportant yesterday now felt quite serious. Our closeness had faded because things changed. She had been saying no to my kind gestures more often, so I tried less frequently. What else might I have missed? By the time she came to bed, I noticed that even our simple acts of love, like holding hands, were happening less. Was there another reason for this besides the clear one? I couldn't think of anything. In the end, my worries seemed unfounded when Julie came out of the bathroom, gave me a quick kiss on the cheek, and said goodnight. The next 2 weeks were tough. I wanted things to feel normal, but it was hard. As a test, the next evening, I didn't greet her with a kiss when I came in. I had done that every night for 16 years, and I thought she would notice the missing gesture, but she didn't seem to realize, and that hurt. I chose not to show any affection or mention special moments during that time. It felt like she didn't fully see what was happening. This made me look for other signs. We had shared financial goals, so I had made a spreadsheet years ago to track our spending. Each time a bank statement came, I sorted the amounts into categories. I believed that by understanding how we spent money, we could save where needed. After updating my records and looking over last year's expenses, everything seemed normal. There were no surprises, which was what I expected as an accountant. However, I started monitoring her car settings each night and tried to figure out where she was. I even called her office randomly to tell her I loved her. Sometimes the receptionist told me she wasn't at her desk, which led me to call her cell phone. Through this, I found out something she hadn't shared. I called her office phone 2 weeks after my worries began and was connected to the receptionist. She reminded me it was Julie's day off. I later learned that, as part of the labor union agreements, the company gave them a day off every 2 weeks, which also applied to office workers. 7 months earlier, Julie had started taking this day off on Wednesdays, and I had no idea. This made my feelings of doubt turn into a sense of fear. It was no surprise that Julie's car was cold that Wednesday night, and the seat was not adjusted for my height again. I knew I was distracted during dinner and was surprised that Julie didn't seem to notice. Before dinner, I checked our bed sheets and the spare bedroom sheets, only to find they were the same as that morning. If someone else had been driving, then the trip must have brought them home. Otherwise, Julie would have adjusted it herself. Any sense of comfort vanished when I saw that the throw rug on the couch was missing, later finding it on the washing line. So I now knew when and where things were happening. I had my suspicions about what was happening, but the reasons were still unclear. Just 2 weeks before, I believed I was in a caring relationship with someone I thought I could trust completely. At dinner, my mind was busy trying to figure out what to do next, but I didn't have enough proof to talk to her about it. Then, Julie interrupted my thoughts. Karen called earlier. She lost an earring down the bathroom sink and wants to know if you can help her get it back. Karen lived next door. She and her husband had been friends of ours until they divorced last year after she found out he had not been faithful. Their breakup turned sour, partly because of advice that made them hire lawyers to protect their belongings. In the end, the lawyers got most of what they had. Their feelings turned into anger and bitterness. Since then, Karen had avoided our gatherings with couples. I tried to be a considerate neighbor and helped her with little jobs every few weeks. This brought me closer to her than it did to Julie. Feeling relieved to have something to focus on, I grabbed my tools and went over to help her after dinner. The pipe under the bathroom sink was hard to reach, but I managed to get it off. While Karen sat by the bathtub, we chatted, and eventually, after pulling off the pipe, I found the earring and took the chance to clean out the buildup inside. Strangely, Karen ran out of things to say, so I decided to ask her something. "Karen, can I ask you a personal question?" "Sure, Dave." "What first made you think your husband was not being truthful?" Karen answered quickly, sharing that she had noticed some sudden changes in his behavior. She had even looked into his actions a bit more closely and had seen things that worried her. By the time she finished talking, I had fixed the pipes and was getting ready to leave. "What made you ask that, Dave?" I hesitated, thinking about what to say. She noticed my pause. "Oh no, not Julie." With no one else to talk to about my fears, I decided to tell her everything over a coffee she made for us. After I finished, she suggested some possible reasons for Julie's actions. None of her ideas seemed very convincing, even though I wanted to believe them. Our talk was interrupted by a knock at the door. Julie came in but didn't explain why she was there. If I had to guess, she seemed a bit suspicious of what I was doing, even though there was nothing wrong. I remembered that people who keep secrets often feel uneasy about others. However, it made me think that she might be worried about our relationship. I ended up leaving to go home with her about 15 minutes later. The next day, Karen called me at work. She said she thought I might be wrong about Julie and had an idea on how to figure things out. She still had all the equipment from her past relationship. Instead of selling it, she decided to keep it to check on her next partner. This made me sad, but I understood that being betrayed can make it hard to trust others. 2 days later, I took a break from work to meet Karen. She showed me how everything worked. By the end of our meeting, I had 3 cameras set up in my house, one at the front door, one facing the couch, and one in the bedroom. By the next morning, I had a tracker in Julie's car and the software on my laptop. In the 12 days until her next day off, I mostly observed and learned how to watch my wife closely. It amazed me how much I noticed when I paid attention. Almost a month later, Julie had no idea that we hadn't been close aside from quick goodnight hugs, and I had almost stopped talking to her. We had never gone so long without closeness. I wanted to know why she was acting this way. I also noticed that Julie was more distant from the kids. She paid much less attention to them than usual and hardly joined us on our weekend outings. I planned those outings because I wanted to avoid her. Pretending everything was okay was tiring. The last thing I observed happened on her next day off. I noticed for the first time that she wasn't wearing her work clothes when she came down for breakfast. I felt a pang of guilt for not seeing this sooner. Then a wave of anger hit me as I realized I had been too trusting. I was convinced that something significant was going to happen that day, so after driving around the block, I parked and opened my laptop. Through the cameras, I watched Julie take the kids to the bus stop and then tidy up the kitchen. When her usual time to leave came and went, I knew I was in for something surprising. Then she surprised me by sitting on the couch with a coffee and watching daytime television. She looked like an ordinary mother enjoying her day off. She stayed in front of the television until about 11 when she got up to answer the phone. From where the camera was, I couldn't hear the conversation, but I saw her smiling. I was okay with not hearing her words because I could listen to the recording later. After she hung up, I saw her go upstairs to change into a nice dress. I felt a little strange watching her change. I was so focused that I almost missed the man walking toward me on the sidewalk. I recognized him as one of her colleagues. He ran the service department of their dealership. I ducked down and waited for him to pass. When I stood up, he was directly across from my house. He looked around casually before crossing the street and walking straight into my house through the unlocked front door. I struggled to switch screens back to the one showing the view of the front door. Just then, my world felt like it was falling apart. He and Julie were standing in my living room, enjoying a moment together. It took all my self-control not to run over and confront them. I watched them move out of sight, but they didn't head back outside or toward the bedroom. The camera showed a different angle of the living room, and I felt a bit confused. Then I saw the garage door open, and it all made sense. I ducked down as my wife's partner drove past. I hadn't explored the GPS tracking feature of my surveillance much. I wasn't sure how accurate it was, so I felt it was important to keep them in view. That worked well until they left town on a quiet road. I dropped back to avoid being seen. 5 minutes later, they arrived at a place called the Farmhouse Restaurant. I drove past and parked further up the road. I looked up the restaurant online and saw it was just that, a restaurant, not a hotel. This made me feel a bit better. Maybe this wasn't as bad as I thought. Still, that hope was hard to hold on to. I started to feel awkward sitting in a quiet spot. So, I drove back a little and parked in a less noticeable area to keep an eye on the GPS tracking. I had enough proof to be almost sure my marriage was over. Even if he drove her home and they shared a friendly goodbye, she had already crossed the lines we had set for acceptable behavior. An hour and a half after they got to the restaurant, the software beeped, indicating movement. I watched the dot on the screen coming toward me. I closed the laptop and waited for Julie's car to pass my hiding spot. I felt less anxious about losing track of them now. I knew the tracker was accurate. While waiting at a stoplight on the edge of town, I turned on the computer again and saw her car was heading straight back home. I arrived at my previous parking spot near the house at 1:30, just a minute ahead of Julie and her partner. I knew they would have the house to themselves for another 2.5 hours. I switched applications and pulled up the camera footage again. I chose the living room view since that was the only place I had seen them together. There they were again, being very close on the couch. I forced myself to watch. If I interrupted now, they could argue that this was as far as they had gone, and some people might wonder why I was so upset. They stayed that way for what felt like a long time. It had certainly been a while since I had experienced anything like that. That annoyed me more than anything. I guess that's what people mean when they say that if you give yourself to someone, it affects others too. Rob was the guy's name. I had met him at some of Julie's work events. He was a mechanic who had worked his way up. That explained how he knew what was wrong with Julie's car. If he had just fixed it for her, I might have never found out what was going on. They crossed a line that I felt I couldn't ignore. I saw Julie sitting up, and Rob quickly shifting positions. A wave of emotions hit me. I knew that look on her face far too well. Now might be a good time to tell you how I handle crisis situations. I'm one of those people who don't panic but instead think clearly. So while I might have been furious at that moment, I was far from losing control. It wasn't bad to be so calm while witnessing the end of my marriage and the disruption of my family, two things I cared about most in the world. I'm not someone who plans a lot. I prefer to trust my gut to help me make choices during tough times. I didn't try to sneak into the house. Looking back, I realized I went unnoticed because she had her eyes closed and was lost in the moment while he was in a strange position. With no real plan, other than to stop what I was seeing, I walked over to the couch and grabbed a handful of his hair. Later, I thought that the pain I caused him made him fall back. He really turned around quickly and landed hard, looking shocked. Then he faced me, still on the floor. This is where my calm anger worked in my favor. I decided almost instantly not to be too aggressive. I knew this was being recorded, and I might need some of it later. In that moment, I had a plan. I would use the camera. I noticed the worried look on Julie's face and stepped a bit closer, holding my hand out toward him. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to hurt you," I said loudly for the recording. I watched as he reacted strongly, clutching his side and thrashing around. I don't take pleasure in others' pain, but it was a reaction I didn't expect. Ignoring Julie, I stepped outside for some quiet and called for help. When I came back, Julie was trying to assist a still upset Rob. I waited patiently, preparing what I would say. The ambulance arrived in about 10 minutes. One officer looked at Rob, while the other observed the scene. One woman looking disheveled, one man clearly in pain, and one man calmly waiting. You didn't need to be very clever to figure out what had happened. He went outside, probably to call for help. The paramedics must have had a good plan because Rob was only groaning by the time they put him in the ambulance. Julie wanted to go with him, but I gently stopped her. After the ambulance turned the corner, Julie looked at me as if she had just seen me for the first time. She paused and then walked to the master bedroom. I let her go this time. I turned on the kettle because it's always best to treat those who come to help with kindness. They arrived shortly after. I quickly explained what happened. I had come home unexpectedly because I suspected my wife might be unfaithful. I walked in on something I didn't expect and reacted without thinking. I felt bad for possibly hurting him, as I had tried to help and it led to an accident. I could see the officers were doubtful. They were wise to this and separated to take statements from Julie and me. When the officer came back downstairs, he shared what he had learned with his partner. Then, they both approached me. "Mr. Brown, your story matches your wife's to some extent, but we have some concerns about your account. Mr. Brown, I am placing you under arrest for—" "Wait!" My voice stopped them in their tracks. "I have everything recorded if that helps." I hoped to avoid showing the footage, but I needed to protect myself for what might come next. I moved a few books to reveal the camera. They followed me to the car while I got my laptop and played the recording. They watched the key moments a few times and clearly saw that my account made sense. They took the laptop, warned me this wasn't over, and left. Knowing the recorder in the ceiling was my best proof, I took it down and put it in my car. Then I returned to the kitchen to think about my future. Yes, I said my future. We didn't really have one anymore. I heard the bedroom door open and Julie step out carefully. I waited with my back to her. I think she stopped when she saw me. After a long pause, she spoke in a quiet voice. "I'm sorry, Dave." "Don't say any more, Julie. Just answer one question for me. Do you want to stay married to me and promise to be loyal again?" "Yes, of course, Dave." "In that case, you haven't had enough time to talk, and I haven't had enough time to listen. I'm going to stay at a motel until you figure out what you want to say to me. I really want you to share something strong enough for us to get through this. I'll visit every night after work to see the kids. I'll stay for dinner and leave after they go to bed. When you're ready, let me know and we can talk." I said all this without looking her way. I stood up and walked past her to pack my things. I took a quick look at her while I moved by. I had seen people in trouble who looked better than she did. She was pale, her makeup was a mess, and she looked worn out, almost as if she had lost some of her strength. I packed a few items, then quietly left and checked into the nearest motel. As promised, I came back at 5 p.m. the following day. At first, there was no one around. Then I found the kids doing their homework while Julie sat on our bed looking away. I chatted with the kids until 6, but it was clear that Julie would not be making dinner. I took them out for some takeout that was not too unhealthy. This is when I realized my lack of planning was a problem. They asked what was wrong with their mom. I didn't know how to answer. I gave some vague responses that didn't seem to calm them, so I tried to buy some time. They could sense something was wrong and looked worried. On the way home, I debated how much to share with them. I believe honesty is very important, so I decided to tell them the truth once Julie was there. Once we got home, I asked the boys to wait while I went to the bedroom. When I called out Julie's name, she started to turn over but then stopped and stayed silent. "Julie, the boys want to know what's wrong with you, and I plan to tell them the truth. If you want to join us, please come." I waited 5 minutes, but when Julie didn't come, I went back to the bedroom. She hadn't moved, so I returned to the kitchen. As gently as I could, I explained the situation to Pete and Mick. I shared how I felt and what might happen next. They didn't say anything, but I could tell they were upset. I assured them I would take care of them, but they might need to help more around the house. They both showed kindness and gave me comforting hugs. I realized I wasn't hiding my sadness as well as I thought. I sent them off to bed with a promise to see them again the next day. Julie still hadn't come out. That night I had trouble sleeping in my empty motel room. I lay in the dark, thinking about everything, and realized I had one concern. Even if I avoided trouble before, there might still be some consequences. I focused on solving any potential issues that could arise. The next day I left work an hour early, bought a bag of grapes, and went to the hospital. The receptionist guided me to Rob's room. He was asleep when I walked in, but he quickly woke up when he sensed I was there. I saw fear in his eyes. He tried to sit up but winced in pain and gave up. I leaned in closer to speak to him. "You have a choice. You can accept what happened as the result of your actions or take another path. If you choose the other option, we might have to meet again in a less friendly way. Do you understand?" He nodded. "Good. I hope we don't have to talk again." As I walked down the hallway, I noticed a woman I recognized with her 2 teenage children. After I passed, I heard her say, "Excuse me, my husband works with your wife, right?" Not wanting to be rude, I stopped and turned around. I remembered her from events at the car dealership. "Yes, ma'am, Julie works with Rob." "Can I ask what you're doing here? I saw you leave my husband's room." I wasn't sure if I should tell Rob's wife the truth. Unusually for me, I hesitated. She broke the silence. "Boys, go into your father's room. I'll be there soon." We waited until the boys were out of sight. I stayed quiet, waiting for her to speak first. "The last time he was in the hospital was when another man found him with his wife." I must have shown my surprise on my face. "Wow, I'm right, aren't I? You caught him with Julie, didn't you? Then you made sure he wouldn't forget it." I could only nod at this very smart woman. "Great, that saves me some trouble. Can you share some details, please?" As I briefly explained what had happened the day before, she moved down the hall to see her children through the window. I noticed Rob looking at us, shaking his head in a clear, silent no. When I told her I had video proof, she quickly wrote her email on a piece of paper from her bag and asked me to send it to her. She was a little confused. After the first time he messed up, she had hidden a GPS tracker in his car to keep an eye on him. I suggested he must have found it and started taking a taxi to see Julie instead. That made sense. She also carefully checked their spending. Since she was a stay-at-home mom, we thought my house might be where they met, since neither wanted to leave a paper trail. After wishing each other luck, we said goodbye. I suspected Rob's day was about to get much worse. After everything that happened, I rushed back to the house I used to live in. When I got out of my car, Karen was getting out of hers next door. She came over and asked if I had any news. I quickly shared what had happened. She was very upset and understood what I was going through. After promising to listen whenever I needed to talk, we parted ways, and I headed inside. Julie looked tired in her robe. She went straight into the bedroom as soon as I walked in. The kids were searching the pantry for snacks but weren't having much luck. I helped them find some treats and got some food for Julie, too. When I asked the boys, they told me their mother hadn't said anything all day. Since she didn't make their school lunches, they took whatever they could find in the pantry. It was not right for the boys to go hungry, so I took them with me, left the motel, and moved back into my house, at least to the spare bedroom. We went to a late-night store to buy food. The next morning, I called work and said I'd be late. I made the boys a healthy breakfast and packed their lunchboxes before sending them off to the bus stop. When I got a message from her job, I called her workplace and said she was sick. I also asked my boss to reduce my hours at work. This became our routine for the next 2 weeks. I got the boys ready in the morning, met them after school, did the shopping, and cooked dinner. They helped with chores around the house. I watched Julie slowly get better. After a week, she started getting dressed and eating. We barely talked to each other. Each night, I offered her a chance to discuss what was happening between us, but she never took it. A few times, I came home to find one of her friends over. They usually left quickly, often giving me a look that said they didn't approve. Feeling frustrated, I went to the police station to get my laptop back. I sent a short email to everyone we knew. "Dear friends, Dave and Julie are having some problems right now. If you have any questions, please ask me directly." After that, the visits and curious looks reduced. I didn't feel good about this, but I knew that divorce could change friendships. I didn't want to cause issues with anyone on her side just because she wouldn't share the truth. No one asked for more details. To keep my spirits up, I visited Karen every few days. She became a great friend during this time, and I could tell Julie didn't like it. One Saturday at Karen's house, I saw Julie watching us from the window. By the middle of the second week, Julie was strong enough to go back to work, and the next day, I found her cooking dinner when I got home. However, she still wouldn't look me in the eye and avoided being alone with me. I wasn't sure if she had talked to Rob. I had sent a message to his wife and got a kind reply. She had arranged for him to be cared for in the hospital, but they were still uncertain about his recovery. Another important moment during those 2 weeks was a visit to a lawyer. He explained what usually happens during a divorce and suggested that the custody and other arrangements might favor Julie. Pete was old enough to choose which parent he wanted to live with, but Mick wasn't. The lawyer said that the courts usually tried to keep siblings together and often sided with the mother. I thought this made sense. In my opinion, most mothers are often better at raising kids than most fathers, though there are exceptions. When it became clear I couldn't keep him, he kindly explained what I needed to do and where to find the right forms and details. I knew that under Australian law, I had no real legal options against their employer. I could possibly have them let go, but that would complicate my situation with child support and alimony. Ironically, it was a Wednesday when Julie started the conversation. I was in bed with the light off when she knocked softly on the door and came in. I knew she was dealing with some things on her own and had probably drunk a lot of wine that evening. She kept the light off and sat on the edge of the bed, her face in shadows with just a little light from the hallway. I sat up. "Do you love me, Dave?" "Yes. I can't stop feeling something I've felt for 17 years. Were you serious when you said you hoped I could give you a reason to stay?" "Yes, Julie, that's still what I hope for." I gave her a moment to gather her thoughts. Finally, she said, "I just can't, Dave. I love you, but I can't explain what I've done. I'm asking you for 3 months. I'll see a counselor and maybe they can help us figure things out." I thought about this for a long time. "I'm sorry, Julie. I can't wait that long. Leaving things unresolved isn't fair to me or the boys. You can't find a reason for what you did because there isn't one. It's over, Julie." Her reaction surprised me. It seemed filled with frustration and guilt. Julie had always had a hard time taking responsibility for her actions. "You're being self-righteous. You never wanted to hear me out, did you? If you had just been a bit more understanding, I might have thought about things differently. It feels like it's been a long time, hasn't it?" This wasn't like Julie at all. I guessed the wine was affecting her. After she left my room, I faced another sleepless night. The next morning, she was still at home when I went to work, but she didn't come home that night. When I checked, some of her things were missing. She came back 3 days later looking like she had been through something tough, but offered no explanation. I found out why that night. I had started checking our bank balance online every evening. I saw a transfer to a local law firm for the amount of a retainer. I guessed she had talked to a lawyer who had told her that leaving us had put her in a tough position. An email that night cleared up the rest of the mystery. It was from Rob's wife. "Just so you know, I went to the hospital today to talk about my divorce with Rob. Your wife was there holding his hand. I'm sorry, but I lost control for a bit." Did Julie think that since she missed her chance to fix things, she wanted to move on with someone new? I heard he might not have a good future. I went to Julie's room to discuss things further. "Julie, after what happened the other night, it's clear our marriage is over." For the first time in a while, she looked me in the eye and nodded softly. We both saw how Karen's divorce turned out. By the time the lawyers were done, nobody had much left except them. I may not be able to stay married to you, but I still care about you. The thought of us growing to resent each other worries me. We need to handle this together, at least for the boys. What if we try to agree on the divorce without the lawyers? That way, we can protect what we have. I could see she understood my point. We had enough to live comfortably, but didn't want to lose a lot to legal fees. I guess the lawyers she met with had not given her much hope for a fair deal. "You'll have to do most of the work, Dave. I don't want a divorce. I'm not sure I can put much energy into it. Don't worry, Julie, I'll take care of the details." I decided to wait 2 days before talking again. I didn't want Julie to know I had already gathered a lot of information. After the boys were in bed, I brought it up. "Okay, Julie, I found 2 options for us. We can either live apart for a year, or we can go to 3 required counseling sessions. If the counselor thinks our marriage can't be saved after that, they will give us a certificate to include with the divorce papers." I noticed Julie's eyes brighten at the idea of counseling. But then the hope faded as she realized what that would mean. Eventually, she just nodded. So we both fill out the divorce application and submit it to the family court. They will set up the counseling. Along with our application, we'll also submit a child support agreement for approval. They need to know Pete and Mick will be taken care of, so they aren't left to fend for themselves. There's also a parenting plan we can create together about how we want to raise the kids. The last part, a separation agreement, is not required but is a good idea. It lays out how we handle everything else. If we keep it simple and have friends as witnesses, it should be easy and affordable. Are you okay with me starting on those documents? I finally got a hesitant nod from her. The next evening, we worked together to fill out the online divorce form. Julie didn't say much, but also didn't stop the process. The next day, we got a confirmation, and the week after that, a counseling service reached out to us. The counseling lasted 2 weeks and was more interesting than I thought it would be. The counselor was a woman who clearly knew her job well. In our first session, we had to share what was happening. Julie kept quiet, which meant I did most of the talking. The counselor tried to get Julie to explain her thoughts, but she stayed silent. I felt that she was hoping to find the right words to change my mind. Then, the counselor set up individual sessions for both of us, with Julie scheduled for 2 hours on Monday. As that day approached, she seemed more withdrawn, and her session ended up lasting 3.5 hours. When she returned, I looked for signs of what had happened, but she struggled to make eye contact with me and didn't share anything about her session. My session was also meant to last 2 hours, but ended after an hour and a half. The counselor was very professional. "Mr. Brown, I should let you know that your wife has given me permission to talk about her session on Monday. First, can I confirm what she told me, that you would consider staying married if she gave a good reason for her actions?" "Yes, that was my position, but I have to say that it would take a lot for me to move past my feelings of hurt." The counselor looked at me thoughtfully before sighing. "Why do people often come to me when it's too late? I can't speak for everyone, but for me I thought everything was okay. We had a lovely family and what I felt was a happy marriage. She never mentioned being unhappy. Why seek help when things seem fine?" Yes, that matches what Julie stated. Of all the reasons she shared, she never mentioned any problems with you. In fact, when I asked about your relationship, it sounded almost perfect. In my experience, these kinds of situations can hit men the hardest. They struggle to deal with the shock of being caught off guard. She paused and sighed again. "Let me start by saying that I know you both are not communicating well." I nodded in agreement. "Your wife loves you very much and feels deeply sorry for what has happened. The guilt is a lot for her to handle, and right now she just doesn't have the strength to talk to you. It would be fair to give her some more time to think about this. I'm sorry, but the moment she showed me that she could be so deceitful was when I stopped trying to play fair." "I understand. Julie also knows that you are aware she visited her friend in the hospital. She is worried you might see that as her wanting to stay connected. To her, it was just a kind gesture. She wants you to know that she defended you when he claimed you meant to hurt him." My smile made her smile back. "Thanks for that, Mr. Brown. Counselors like us really need to laugh sometimes. Now let's get back to her explanation. I will tell you what she said and then I'll share my thoughts, but I want to warn you, it may not be very convincing. In cases like this, especially in previously happy marriages, it often isn't." "Let's just move on, Doc." "Okay. Julie keeps saying that she knew what she was doing was wrong and that you wouldn't accept it. Like in many cases, she didn't worry about how you would react because she never thought you would find out." She paused, waiting for me to add to that. I stayed quiet. "The reason behind this is almost as old as time. Your wife began to worry about getting older when a younger, attractive man showed her interest. She felt very flattered. She resisted for a while until she thought he had lost interest. That was when she gave in. Deep down, she worried about not being attractive anymore, and that hurt. I think she convinced herself she had feelings for him. She said he always took her to lunch first, which made their times together feel more like dates. She was trying to relive the carefree days of her youth. In my view, it was less about physical attraction and more about the emotional connection. Your wife insisted she never crossed certain lines and made sure her interactions happened away from your shared home to avoid any disrespect. You know that she used your house, so no extra costs showed up in their finances. Their lunches were inexpensive and paid for in cash." I nodded, finding it all understandable so far. "Your wife was truly upset when she realized she had become distant from you, pulling away from your relationship during that time. She felt even more regret when I mentioned other parts of your closeness, realizing that she had stopped showing affection about a month before the end. I assume that was when you first began to have doubts." Again, I nodded. I had to remind her that because she thought she loved him, being close to you would feel like a betrayal to him. It's strange how some people don't see the thoughts they create in their own minds. "What is it they say, Doctor? Some people build dreams in their heads, others live in those dreams, and professionals just collect stories. Ha, good one. Was there any other explanation, Doctor? No, nothing to take too seriously. I did promise you some insights. I think your wife acted the way she did because she didn't have the strength to say no when the chance came. Also, I feel she might be facing some sadness or emotional struggles. I've suggested that she talk to a professional about it. Many who feel down often make choices that harm themselves. I can say that with her shown regret and the right support, she is unlikely to stray again. Is that enough for you? I didn't hold back. No, not at all. She smiled and then took an envelope out of a folder and gave it to me. What's this? It's a gift certificate for a divorce at any courthouse. At that moment, I realized this situation would end much more easily than I had thought. Now, Mr. Brown, could you tell me how you found out about her actions? I'm gathering data for a project. Maybe I was thankful she wasn't trying to make me feel guilty or push me to stay in a marriage that had lost its warmth. Whatever the reason, I explained how Robert had come to my place because his wife was tracking his car, and they had been using Julie's car for their outings. The counselor smiled at what I shared. Well, that's a new twist, thanks. We said our goodbyes and I went home. I got there before the kids returned from their activities. Julie was waiting, looking worried. I didn't want to be harsh, so I sat across from her and placed the envelope in front of her. Her face fell as she read it, then changed to one of acceptance. I guess this is it, Dave. I'm sorry, and I know I've lost your trust, but please believe that I still care for you. The only way I can show that is by not getting in the way of what you think you need to do. I agree with handling this ourselves. It's for the best. I hope you can forgive me and continue with your life with me as a friend. You don't have to leave right away, do you? At this moment, her emotions began to overflow. She suddenly stood up and walked away, but stopped before she was out of earshot. I don't know if our counselor mentioned this, but I really didn't see how much I had pushed you away. I regret that, along with everything else. If you want to talk, I'm just across the hall. With that, she left. The whole situation would have been very touching if I hadn't seen it coming. You see, I was still listening in on our phone. I had overheard Julie talking with her best friend Cheryl about what to do next. They planned to keep things friendly and try to win back my trust, while secretly hoping to gain more than their fair share of our belongings. It reminded me of those typical stories where siblings seem okay until their parents' will is read, and then everything falls apart. I made dinner for the kids, and when we were done, I noticed Julie still hadn't come out of her room. I decided it was time to tell the kids what was happening. I knocked on Julie's door and asked her to join me for the talk. Her answer only made me angrier. You do it, Dave. I can't face them yet. You need to take responsibility. You caused this mess, and now you want me to handle the tough conversation with the kids? My words shocked her, and I could see her surprise. She looked into my eyes and saw my disappointment. She covered her face as I left the room in frustration. A few minutes later, she came into the living room looking hesitant. Since she was last to arrive, she had to sit alone in a chair while the kids and I sat together on the couch. I could tell they had figured out some of what was going on because they started asking Julie tough questions. Why? How could you do this? Did you think of your family? Julie didn't have any answers and just looked down. When I explained that their parents would be living separately soon, both boys said they wanted to stay with me. I'd always been the fun parent, taking them to parks, camping, and sports, while their mother seemed distant for a long time. Their wish to stay with me caught Julie's attention. Boys, usually mothers get custody in situations like this, she said sternly. I could feel the upcoming talks about custody looming between us. I was taken by surprise and didn't answer right away, which let Pete speak up first. That doesn't seem fair, Mom. Dad didn't do anything wrong. You chose to turn away from him, and he's the one who is hurt. Julie couldn't find a response. I reassured the boys that their mother and I hadn't gone into details yet. I told them that the courts always aim to do what's best for the children, and that I would follow whatever the court decided. I emphasized that a father's main duty is to care for his children. The next evening, I was surprised again when Julie offered to work on the child support agreement and the parenting plan while I focused on the separation agreement. I thanked her for her offer and reminded her that we always needed to think about what was best for the children. We made a plan to talk again in a week. During that week, we took turns caring for the kids while the other worked on the computer. On the second day, she came to my room while I was reading and mentioned her offer again. I kindly said no. A few days later, she came over to my bed and I suggested we hug instead. She agreed and I quietly left after she fell asleep. The next morning, she found me in the master bedroom and she understood the boundaries from then on. A week later, we had enough to start discussing our agreement. I went first and explained the separation agreement. I said it was a common law contract, not related to family court. I shared the important points. The main caregiver would keep the house, we wouldn't change our wills, we wouldn't take on any new debts in both our names, we'd keep our retirement plans, and any new partners would need to respect our family's assets. I also said I would keep the children on my health insurance, and she would be removed from it. We included a clause that said the agreement was final, and that anyone losing a dispute would pay all court costs. All our shared money would be split evenly. Julie agreed, but raised her eyebrows at the part about not paying each other alimony. She started to argue, but I reminded her that it was linked to the other agreements and we should discuss it later. She began by saying the parenting plan and child support agreement were connected. The parenting plan, another common law contract, detailed who would be the primary caregiver and how much time the kids would spend with each parent. Julie shared a paper suggesting that children were generally better off with their mother after a separation. I noted that the paper was written by a woman from a women's studies center, which showed some bias, but I said I had heard similar ideas. Julie was happy to hear that. Then she shared another paper from the same center mentioning that it wasn't good for the non-primary caregiver to have more than 2 days of custody every 2 weeks. I agreed to listen to the experts on that. I suggested we include similar terms about court costs as in my agreement, along with rules that the children wouldn't leave the state and plans for Christmas, birthdays, and holidays. Satisfied with my agreement so far, Julie moved on to the child support agreement. This was the only agreement that needed approval from a government agency. She explained that there was a formula based on our total incomes, the age of the kids, and how much time the kids spent at each parent's home. The formula showed that the non-custodial parent was expected to pay the main caregiver $1,200 every 2 weeks. I said I trusted her advice and suggested we clarify which expenses this payment would cover. Next, we talked about alimony, which was the only point we disagreed on. I noted that with such a high child support payment and other terms, including alimony would allow the main caregiver to live well while the non-custodial parent might struggle financially. She agreed, and we put that topic to rest. Julie seemed surprised by my willingness to agree, but when I explained I was thinking of the kids' best interests, she understood. I suggested we type up a new child support agreement, then sign it, and I could drop it off. We did just that. We wrapped up the evening by thanking each other for making everything go smoothly. 8 days later, we received a certified copy of the child support agreement from the agency. It met their guidelines, and they sent a copy to the family court. We already had copies of the other 2 legal documents. We just needed to sign them with witnesses. Julie wanted her friend Cheryl to be a witness, and I preferred my best friend Karen. I suggested we turn the signing into a fun event with drinks and snacks. The next Friday, we all gathered around the kitchen table with glasses of champagne. Karen was quiet, reading through the agreements while the others chatted. When she finished, she looked at me with a raised eyebrow. I kept my face neutral. Just then, Cheryl accidentally knocked over my drink, spilling it into Julie's lap. She jumped up in surprise, and Cheryl and Karen quickly went to get a cloth. Cheryl apologized while Julie went to change. After things calmed down, everyone signed both agreements. The next day, I took the documents to the family court. We were both surprised when we received a notice to attend a hearing. We thought this wasn't necessary. So 6 weeks later, we found ourselves in front of a judge. He explained that since this was a case without lawyers, he was carefully reviewing everything to make sure all steps were followed. He confirmed that we had signed the agreements willingly. Then he added the 4 documents to the official record and issued an order stating that our divorce would be finalized in 30 days, with no objections allowed. He wrapped up the meeting by congratulating us on ending our relationship in a calm and respectful way. For the next month, I spent time with the kids and searched for apartments to rent. On the 32nd day, I called the court to check for any objections. I invited Karen to join Julie and me for a small celebration. We gathered in the kitchen with our drinks. "Well, Julie, here's to 16 wonderful years and 2 amazing kids." We toasted with our glasses. "Here is a list of apartments for rent, Julie. When are you moving?" I was surprised when Julie reacted unexpectedly, spilling her drink across the table. "What is going on?" "You'll need to find a budget-friendly place. With your salary, paying $1,200 every 2 weeks for child support won't leave you with much." I handed her copies of the court papers. She looked shocked as she read. It stated that I would stay in the family home, and child support was set at $1,200 every 2 weeks, with visitation every 2 weeks. "I bet you're starting to regret raising the child support from the $900 we discussed to $1,200, right? Yes, I heard you talking to Cheryl. That's how I found out that you laughed about how I forgot to mention that the house should be sold when our youngest turns 18. You had high hopes, didn't you? But the kids. If you had looked into this more, instead of just seeing one side, you would understand that boys like Pete and Mick benefit from having a strong dad in their lives. Just so you know, I felt my obligation to you ended when you decided to go your own way. I then had to pick between 2 very different choices, keeping things peaceful or standing up for myself. I chose to stand up for myself, but I held back long enough to build some trust without involving lawyers. I also had 2 other choices. Did I want to show my sons how 2 people who once loved each other could end things positively? That was tempting. Or did I want to teach them about fairness? That when someone breaks trust, there are consequences? Guess which option I picked, Julie? I let Julie think about this. I saw her confusion turn into determination. "I'll fight this," she said strongly. "Good luck with that. You signed all the documents in front of 2 witnesses and confirmed them before a judge. Remember, Julie, if you lose, you'll have to pay all the costs. Do you really want to start the next chapter of your life with nothing?" "I have witnesses. Cheryl and Karen will say I was misled." We both looked at Karen. This was a tricky moment for my plan. Karen didn't know what had happened. She seemed uneasy, though it didn't last long. "How did my marriage end, Julie? Do you really think I'd side with someone who tricked me?" Seeing her defeat, Julie looked like she was breaking down inside. It was a hard sight to see. It might have bothered me if I didn't clearly remember how hard I had tried to respect her in the past months. The fact that she was willing to put me in a bad financial situation while she was doing fine made it easier to accept. Eventually, she managed to pull herself together a bit. "But I trusted you, Dave. And I trusted you too once. We both made mistakes. Now please leave my house. You can still get access to our money in the bank account. Let me know which 2 days you want the boys the week after next." I left with Karen back to her place. "You smart planner. You switched folders when that glass of champagne was spilled, didn't you? What would you have done if Cheryl hadn't been so awkward?" "I won't answer that first question because it could get me in trouble, but if Cheryl hadn't messed up, I might have found a way myself." "Okay. Well, I'm glad you did something. I was starting to lose faith in you when I thought you were just giving up." "Come on, Karen. You know me better than that." "Yes, I'm sorry. Now that you're not married anymore, I want to get to know you even more." "I'd like that." The first sign that my wife didn't deserve my trust came after an invite to our new neighbor's house. Sandy and John had bought the place a year ago, but delayed moving in until they finished big renovations, like a clay tennis court. Sarah and I were the first neighbors they invited over. We had a nice barbecue lunch and some friendly drinks before getting a tour of the house. Our neighborhood was nice, and looking through the gardens took a while before we reached the impressive tennis court. At John's suggestion, Sarah and I went home to change into tennis clothes. 10 minutes later, I found myself feeling unsure about my wife's actions. Why? It became clear that not only did she not know the rules of tennis, but she was also struggling with the basics. This raised some troubling questions. For almost a year, Sarah had been taking tennis lessons at the country club every Friday morning, yet her skills didn't show it. Throughout the day, I tried to think of explanations, but none made sense. Sarah had always been good at sports, even winning trophies in soccer and netball, which made her struggles with tennis even more confusing. Strangely, Sarah seemed to be having a great time, laughing and joking after every missed shot. She seemed completely unaware of the doubts swirling around in my head. Our hosts seemed to notice my distraction, so I made an excuse, saying I had a lot on my mind. Curiosity got the better of me, so I changed my plans for the next Friday to see what was really happening. Sarah did go to the country club. She walked confidently to the sports area, past the tennis courts, and entered one of the staff rooms. I saw her go into room 4B. I recognized some faces around the club, but chose not to approach them directly. Instead, I talked to the duty manager about my worries. He called for a security guard, and we headed to room 4B together. When they opened the door, I prepared myself for whatever I would find inside. I felt uneasy. When my wife saw what was happening, her eyes widened, and then she fainted in a rather funny way. Turning away, the other man quickly got dressed, not seeming to care much about what was unfolding. The duty manager told his staff member to leave while I took Sarah's wedding and engagement rings from her hands. I didn't worry about her dignity. It appeared she didn't either. I then grabbed the other man's shoulder and looked at the manager and the security guard nearby. They nodded slightly before looking away. In that moment, I let my anger take hold and confronted the younger man. With him on the floor and still making noise, I knew Sarah was not in any danger, so we left the room. If Sarah and the other man decided to be together, it no longer mattered to me. Our relationship seemed finished, or so I thought. It was hard to let go of the love I had felt for over 20 years. Sarah took advantage of that and made many excuses for her actions. She said she felt unwanted and claimed that a younger man had drawn her in. At first, she begged me not to tell our kids because it would hurt them too much. I agreed to keep quiet for now. She claimed this was her first mistake, and since I had been feeling unsure, I almost believed her. I told her that since she was responsible for breaking our marriage, it was also her duty to fix it. She accepted that, and I secretly hoped she would find a way to earn back my trust. Despite everything she said, doubt still nagged at me. Would I have been strong enough to say no if a younger woman had come on to me? I wished I could say yes, but I wasn't sure. After a moment, she asked what it would take for me to forgive her. I gave her a tough task, to make me forget everything that had happened between us. In my mind, I thought it was something she couldn't do. As I packed my things and left our shared space, the mood in the house grew very cold until the next weekend. Sarah's choices made it clear that my search for a new place to live made her feel desperate. On Friday night, she told me she was going to see her close friend, Julia. She gave me Julia's home phone number and told me I could call any time to check on her. I could even ask to talk to Julia's husband, Jake, who I knew well. I didn't feel the need to do that. While Sarah had made some bad choices lately, she wasn't doing anything careless. Late that night, after 11 o'clock, Sarah rushed into our bedroom filled with excitement. She and Julia had come up with a great idea that met all my demands. I shook off my sleepiness and listened, hoping to find a reason to forgive her. She suggested that part of her plan would allow me to spend time with another woman once a week for a year. It would hurt her to know about it, but she believed that this pain would keep her faithful. She quieted me when I tried to speak, saying that 2 wrongs don't make a right, but begged me to let her finish. Julia had a friend who visited a hypnotherapist in our town for her fear of spiders and said it worked. Sarah and Julia looked online and found that memories could be erased, as long as the person wanted to forget them. Tearfully, she asked me to think about it. If I agreed, she would contact the hypnotherapist right away. I promised to think about it if she left me alone. I didn't sleep much that night. The idea felt like the reason I needed. I thought that the whole experience had scared Sarah enough that she wouldn't break her promises again. Also, her plan fit the demands I set for her. I had given her a challenge, and it seemed like she was meeting it. Doing the therapy could help her forget what she had done, at least in my eyes. The next morning, I sat down with my wife, who seemed calm. I told her that I would not start a relationship with another woman under any circumstances. Sarah looked a bit anxious until I shared my next thought. I would help the hypnotherapist remove my memories of her affair, but I had one condition. She needed to promise me she wouldn't use my forgotten memories to betray my trust again. She assured me that after everything that had happened, she would be more careful and wouldn't let it happen again. Sarah cried, feeling my doubt, but she quickly calmed down and convinced me that it wouldn't happen. This whole situation had deeply scared her, and she wouldn't risk the relationship we had just started to fix. She told me she loved me and would never hurt me again. Feeling reassured, she wanted to deepen our relationship, but I wasn't ready for that. I asked if she was in good health, and this took away her excitement. Fortunately, the hypnotherapist had a spot open the following Wednesday afternoon, and Sarah booked it. We decided I would go to work early while she tidied up any signs of her staying in the spare room. We planned to meet at the office at 3 p.m. I arrived 15 minutes early, as usual. I stepped into the clinic, which used to be a home, and greeted the receptionist. She handed me a new patient form to fill out. It was just after 3 when Sarah arrived at the clinic. I had returned the form and was sitting down. She looked a bit frustrated, mentioning a detour due to an accident on her route. Just then, the receptionist kindly said, "Go right in," and pointed to a door. Sarah, already on her feet, walked to the door and knocked before going in. I got up to follow her, but as I crossed the reception room, I heard a loud voice, surprisingly strong for a woman. "Hello again, Mrs. Brown. Have you lost weight?" I froze. The receptionist then said, "You must have been here before, Mr. Brown. We already have your details in our system." As I processed what the hypnotherapist said and what the receptionist innocently revealed, Sarah turned around. I found myself looking into the eyes of my wife of 23 years. She looked unusually pale and panicked, quickly looking down when her eyes met mine. I took a deep breath as the reality of our past began to piece itself together. The journey that brought me, Dave Brown, to that moment had only been 3 weeks, or so I thought. There were no more doubts. My once happy life was in ruins. For the second time, I realized this. I had always thought of my wife as my equal, but lately her choices had raised concerns. Even so, her actions changed both our lives, and many others would feel the effects. We stood still for what felt like a long time, each lost in our own thoughts. However, time didn't stop. It seemed to speed up as Sarah rushed out of the building. She bumped into me so hard that I turned around completely. I stumbled and fell into one of the chairs in the reception area. My voice called after her, "We're done." Epilogue. Jane, the hypnotherapist, sat with me, speaking softly. She explained that she was upset when Sarah reached out to her again. Due to privacy rules, she couldn't inform me that I was being misled, so she had a different receptionist greet Sarah instead. This was a discreet way to help me notice without breaking any rules. I thanked her warmly for her honesty. During our hour together, she acted like a counselor and a friend. She already knew a lot about me, which made it easy to talk. At the end of our session, we stood up. Jane smiled and shook my hand, saying she felt I was calm enough to drive safely. However, she suggested I call a friend to go with me. As we walked to the door, she said, "You're probably glad you have that agreement in place." I stopped in my tracks. "What agreement?" We headed back to her office and sat down again. It turned out that I had asked Sarah to sign an agreement when I first visited her a little over a year ago as a part of my therapy process. The me from then had been much wiser than the me now. My gratitude for Jane grew even more, and I asked how I could help her. She surprised me with her answer. She mentioned 2 receptionists that shared the job. The other one, Sandra, had been there for my first visit and had expressed her disappointment that my therapy worked, hoping that some good people were still single. Sandra was slightly younger than me and had recently left a tough marriage. She was hesitant to trust another person and was feeling lonely. Jane asked me to promise I would take Sandra out on one date when things settled down. I happily agreed. When I got home, it looked like a storm had hit. Much of Sarah's things were gone, and papers were scattered everywhere. I searched but couldn't find any sign of the agreement. I decided to call local law offices the next day to see if I was a client, but might have forgotten about it. While I was cleaning the house and organizing the rest of Sarah's things in the garage, the phone rang. It was my daughter, asking what was happening. Sarah wanted to be the first to say something. She made up a story that I had agreed to let her see other people, which wasn't true. Then she said I had changed my mind and was punishing her. I got very frustrated, and my daughter believed my side of the story because I was so passionate about it. Luckily, she found it hard to believe that I would be unfaithful. I called my son to see if he had heard the same story from his mother. Sarah's lies only made me angrier. With a lot of anger, I wrote an email to her parents, siblings, friends, and co-workers. In the email, I explained what Sarah was saying about me was false. I also attached a video of her reaction when she was caught in an awkward moment with her tennis coach. I shared other stories to show that Sarah had a pattern of being untruthful. Many people responded, offering their support. Just before midnight, Sarah called me. She was upset and shouting, but I could tell that her children, parents, and many friends were pulling away from her. As the call went on, she calmed down enough to start making threats. "Contact everyone you sent that email to and take it back, or I will ruin everything for you." "You've already done that," I said, letting her know she no longer had control over me. This made her break down, alternating between crying and making threats. The next day, I made 5 calls to find the lawyer who had prepared our agreement after marriage. Soon, I received a copy in my email. It was clear and signed. Sarah had signed away most of her rights to me if I could prove she was unfaithful after a certain date. I contacted the lawyer to begin the divorce process and discuss Sarah's financial responsibilities. By the time the divorce was finalized, Sarah had sold most of her things to get by. I learned that she had reached out to old friends for help, but everyone had turned her away. The last I heard about her was from my daughter, who was one of the few people from our past life still willing to talk to Sarah. She said Sarah was relying on one of the charities she used to help. Soon after that, she vanished. My daughter still receives a birthday card from Sarah, but there is no return address. As for me, I went on a date with Sandra. One date led to another, and soon we were going out regularly. At first, we were hesitant to open our hearts again, but eventually we got married. Jane was the maid of honor, and we were enjoying our happy moments together.